Our thanks for staying with News at Prime, a non-profit organization that was established to help beneficiaries of the land reform program put their land to profitable use, says food security is becoming an ongoing concern. It's after Parliament announced that it's on track to finalize the redrafting of Section 25 of the Constitution. This will allow for expropriation of land without compensation. For more on this, we're joined by Peter Setou. He's Chief Executive of the Vumelana Advisory Fund. Thank you so much for your time. Food security is something that we talk about in October, particularly because a lot of the emphasis over this month is around food and how the world secures its food, etc. One doesn't ever necessarily tie it in with land reform, at least not the way that you have as an advisory firm that has been working with all of these different cooperatives in advising them.
Yeah, I think food security is a reality for not only for South Africa, but for many other countries out there. To be fair, I think South Africa has really made good progress when it comes to addressing issues of food security. I mean, there's a survey that was conducted by Stats SA, which seems to confirm that as at 27, about 6.8 million people experienced hunger. Now, why I'm saying there has been some progress, if you look at 2012, that number was sitting at around 13 million people. So that number is really halved. But the fact of the matter is, whilst as a country we are food secure at national level, there's food insecurity at household level. Now, most of the people who are really affected happen to also be staying in the rural areas. Now, this is where land reform for us can really play a big role. Over the last couple of years, we've seen a number of farms or portions of land actually transferred to South Africans. In excess of 8 million hectares have already been transferred to beneficiaries of land reform. Of these 8 million hectares that have already been transferred, we are aware that there has been a number of failures in certain respects, i.e. that a lot of these farms that have been transferred remain unproductive. Now, if these farms become unproductive, it means there are job losses, it means people cannot produce food, etc. So that's why we are saying that it is of crucial importance to support beneficiaries of land reform in order to turn this situation around so that we can return and make sure that these farms are productive so that we can create much needed jobs, income and skills. And through this, we will be able to address security.
With that in mind, what in particular do you think has led to many beneficiaries then also coming around and saying, instead of giving us the land, we'll take the money? Is it because of how difficult, at least the perception is, to be able to work the land and generate some kind of income out of it?
Well, the reality is a lot of people who were displaced are now staying in urban areas, etc. So a lot of them, we take it for granted that they want to go back and actually do farming, and that's not entirely true. Some people would prefer to really get cash because they don't want to work the land, you know. So that's probably one of the reasons why some of the beneficiaries of land reform opted for cash settlement instead of getting the land. But those who actually ended up taking the land, we've seen a number of areas, whilst there are some pockets of success, we've seen, sadly, a number of areas where there is a need for intervention.
When you talk about support, what exactly would that support look like? Is it, and which parts of the chain would it have to affect? Is it about assisting people who've inherited perhaps sometimes very old farms, very old infrastructure, and they now have to build it up from scratch? Or what are the experiences that you're having?
Well, our experiences are that when the land is actually restored, frequently beneficiaries of land reform do not have access to, do not have the requisite skills to actually work the land. They do not always have access to capital. In fact, access to capital is a huge hindrance for most of these beneficiaries. They also do not have access to markets. And as Vumelana Advisory Fund, we are saying partnering with the private sector is the most immediate way through which we can address some of these challenges.
Sure. And do you find that it's difficult having to provide the support at almost every level then to build these farms up from what they are to potentially what they could be? Because we know that government is talking a lot about having identified the agricultural sector in particular as being one of those sectors that could be a key driver of economic growth. But are you finding that this translates in the way in which these beneficiaries are able to get assistance once they have the actual land?
Well, I think as South Africans, we must accept the fact that if we are to make any dent to some of the challenges that are actually facing land reform, we've got to step up our efforts to support beneficiaries of land reform, specifically to ensure that we support them to create relevant structures that they can use to run these pieces of land, to make sure that they are upskilled, they get the requisite skills so that they can start running their businesses in a much more sustainable fashion, to make sure that we address issues like, for example, governance. We know, for example, in community setups that because of lack of governance and transparency, often you'll find that there are community infightings, etc. The only way to deal with this is to capacitate the leadership, make sure that they are well capacitated, they are able to have annual general meetings and give feedback to members of the community, they are able to table, for example, audited financial statements in a way to make sure that there is that level of transparency, and then the broader community members can start having trust and get this feeling that they're not being taken for a ride.
The issues that you're raising, many of them would have to be dealt with at local government level, which we also know is where there is a dire state of affairs, whether it's with the transparency that you're raising, or even just the ability of community members to be able to raise legitimate issues and have them be responded to. I mean, you know, the statistics are wide in terms of how government, local government in some areas has in many ways failed people. And it seems to also be a political problem. With the absence of political parties coming on board and playing the role that they have in terms of putting in leadership that will be accountable, are there no other solutions?
Well, our considered view is that this is something that requires all role players and stakeholders to really participate. From government to civil society to the private sector, they all have a role to play in making sure that we can make land reform a success and it can be run in a more sustainable fashion. We need all these parties on board.
As far as the amendments then to Section 25 are concerned, what in particular will you be looking out for?
Well, it's still early phases for us to really make any pronouncements on that. But as Vumelana, we are carefully monitoring the situation, and as soon as the parliamentary process gets underway, we will obviously engage with that process. And part of what we want to do is to share our experiences as Vumelana at a practical level. And I mean, as Vumelana, over the last 5 years or so, we've concluded in excess of 20 projects, and which have got the potential to mobilize in excess of 600 million in investments and really impacting on beneficiaries of land reform. And throughout this, journey, we've learned quite a lot. And this is part of what we want to share with policymakers so that we do not end up repeating the same and old mistakes. We believe that we do not have to reinvent the wheel. We've already paid school fees as Vumelana, and we are willing to share this for the benefit of all South Africans.
All right, let's leave it there then for tonight. Thank you so much for your time. Peter Setou is Chief Executive of Vumelana Advisory.